In our headlines on this Friday afternoon, December 1st, here in South Korea. Authorities in the country have announced sanctions against North Korea, targeting individuals behind the regime's most recent satellite launch. The announcement follows similar measures by the US, Japan, and Australia. Meanwhile, President Yoon Suk Yeol is poised to become the first South Korean leader to make a state visit to the Netherlands in 62 years of diplomatic relations, as he actively seeks to strengthen ship cooperation with the European country. On the local trade front, exports expanded for a second straight month in November, soaring 7.8% on year to post $55.8 billion, the highest thus far this year on the back of semiconductor shipments. We start here on the local front, where relevant officials have taken action against North Korea's latest display of defiance. Sanctions have been slapped on individuals believed to have played a part in Pyongyang's latest satellite mission. Our foreign affairs correspondent Pei Eun-ji starts us off.
South Korea has imposed new sanctions targeting 11 North Koreans involved in the regime's satellite and missile development. Newly added to an existing sanctions list are 5 individuals linked to the North satellite program, 4 of whom are at North Korea's National Aerospace Development Administration: Lee Chul-ju, Kim In-bum, Ko Kwan-young, and Choi Myung-soo. Kang Sun, the manager of the Ryongseong Machine Complex, a machinery plant where Kim Jong-un visited last Sunday, was also put on the list. Also added to the list are 6 individuals involved in developing and operating ballistic missiles. They include those at the Munitions Industry Department, Choi Il-hwan and Choi Myung-chul, head of the 727 Research Center Kim Yong-hwan, Lieutenant General Kim Jun-gyu of the Korean People's Army, manager of the Taesong Machine Factory Choi Byung-wan, and an official at the North Korean Embassy in Russia, Jin Su-nam. South Korea is the first in the world to issue sanctions on 10 of these individuals, except for Jin Su-nam. With the sanctions now in place, those wishing to engage in financial transactions with these individuals must obtain permission from the governor of the Bank of Korea or the Financial Services Commission. Announcing the measure on Friday, South Korea's foreign ministry said the government will continue to respond firmly to North Korea's illicit activities that pose a serious threat to national security. This marks the 13th time that the Yoon administration has imposed unilateral sanctions on North Korea. So far, since President Yoon took office, a total of 75 individuals and 53 agencies have been put on the sanctions list. The latest measure was issued in coordination with the US, Japan, and Australia, which all imposed separate sanctions on different North Korean individuals and organizations on the same day. The US State Department said in a statement that this reflects the 4 countries' collective commitment to contesting Pyongyang's illicit and destabilizing activities. Pei Eun-ji, Arirang News.
Indeed, the Biden administration has also adopted additional punitive measures against institutions and individuals believed to be assisting North Korea's hostile weapons ambitions. Our Lee Seung-jae has details.
The U.S. Department of Treasury announced Thursday that it had added a North Korean cyber espionage group and 8 foreign-based agents to the Office of Foreign Assets Control's sanctions list. Among those is Kim Suk-hee, the cyber espionage group which Washington says helped gather intelligence to support the North's strategic objectives. The Treasury Department added that the group uses spear phishing to target individuals employed by government, research centers, think tanks, academic institutions, and news media organizations, including entities in Europe, Japan, Russia, South Korea, and the United States. The Treasury Department also sanctioned 8 individuals, including Kang Kyung-il and Lee Sung-il, who are Iran-based representatives of Green Pine. Green Pine is an entity designated by the U.S. and UN for being responsible for about half of North Korea's arms and related material exports. It's also controlled by the North's Reconnaissance General Bureau, the North's primary foreign intelligence service, as it specializes in the production of maritime military craft and armaments. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And Pyongyang remains on Washington's list of state sponsors of terrorism this year. Now, this is according to an annual report by the U.S. State Department on Thursday that made note of the regime's continued support of acts of terrorism. North Korea has remained on the list since 2017. It was first included in the list in 1988 for its role in the bombing of a Korean Air passenger flight in 1987. Cuba, Iran and Syria are also on the list. On the diplomatic front, President Yoon Suk Yeol is poised to make a state visit to the Netherlands this month. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon covers his agenda.
President Yoon Suk Yeol and First Lady Kim Gun-hee will make a state visit to the Netherlands on December 11th. According to the top office's press release on Friday, this will make Yoon the first South Korean leader to do so in 62 years of bilateral ties. His visit comes as he seeks to strengthen semiconductor cooperation with the European country. In fact, a visit to the headquarters of Dutch chip-making equipment producer ASML with King Willem-Alexander is planned for the first official day after a ceremony and luncheon hosted by the king. The first official day will end with a state dinner. On the second day, President Yoon is set to travel to The Hague, the municipality of the Netherlands, in the morning for a joint meeting with the speakers of the upper and lower houses. He then will have a one-on-one meeting with Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, as the two leaders will likely discuss economic security and semiconductor cooperation. A joint press conference, an MOU signing ceremony, and a government luncheon hosted by the Prime Minister are set to follow as well. The two will also visit the Mauritshuis Museum and the Aegean Peace Museum, which commemorates Korea's independence movement. In the afternoon, the president will return to Amsterdam to attend a meeting with Dutch war veterans and their families at the Amsterdam Royal Palace with the Dutch king. The Netherlands sent over 5,000 troops during the Korean War, which was before the establishment of diplomatic relations. There is also a business forum planned that will be attended by the Korean Economic Delegation and Dutch corporate representatives. As a last event, there will be a special cultural performance hosted by the South Korean government in Amsterdam with the Dutch king and the queen as the main guests. The top office says the Netherlands shares universal values with Korea such as freedom, human rights, and the rule of law, and is a diplomatic partner in value diplomacy, and that the Netherlands ranked second after Germany as the European country with the highest trade volume with South Korea. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And on the local political front, President Yoon Suk Yeol has accepted the resignation of Korea Communications Commission Chairman Lee Dong-kwan. Now, he reportedly shared his intentions to step down ahead of a parliamentary impeachment vote that had been expected to take place later on this Friday, amid the introduction of a related motion by opposition lawmakers earlier this week. He had been accused of disputable personnel appointments, seeking to strengthen state influence over broadcasting stations. His resignation comes 98 days after his appointment. Speaking to reporters earlier Friday, he claimed his decision seeks to prevent work-related disruptions at the broadcasting watchdog. Meanwhile, the cabinet here has passed a motion calling on the National Assembly to reconsider a number of contentious bills. Speaking at a cabinet meeting earlier on this Friday, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo claimed the pro-Labour Yellow Envelope Bill could serve to fuel unlawful protests, while bills related to broadcasting could render difficult impartial content delivery. The Yellow Envelope Bill aims to restrict the companies from making claims for damages against lawful labor union disputes, while the broadcasting bills seek to limit state influence over public broadcasters. These bills were passed unilaterally by the opposition-led parliament last month. Should President Yoon Suk Yeol choose to veto these bills, it would mark the third time he's exercised his veto power since inauguration. Trade figures for November show Korea's exports gain greater ground on the back of stronger semiconductor shipments. Our Park Gun-ho has the latest.
South Korea's exports rose for the second consecutive month in November. According to the industry ministry on Friday, the total amount of exports last month jumped 7.8% on year to $55.8 billion, the largest so far this year. The ministry attributed this to surges in outbound shipments of semiconductors, one of the country's biggest export items, which saw an increase for the first time in 16 months. It also expects more to come as the price of memory chips has been rising since October, while demand for chips used for smartphones and AI is rising as well. Also, 12 other major export items, including automobiles, ships, and secondary batteries, all saw an increase compared to the year before. By region, outbound shipments to 6 out of 9 main exporting countries, including China and the US, jumped in November. Exports to China came to $11 billion, the largest this year, hovering above $10 billion for 4 consecutive months, led by a rebound in semiconductors in November, which account for around 30% of total exports to China. And thanks to further large export volumes of so-called eco-friendly cars to the US, exports reached $10.9 billion last month, also the largest to that region this year. Imports were down around 12% year-on-year to $52 billion, mainly due to a drop in imports of oil, gas, and coal. South Korea saw a trade balance surplus of $3.8 billion, staying in the black for the 6th straight month. That's also the largest trade balance surplus in 26 months. The industry minister said the positive figures came as a result of President Yoon's efforts in sales diplomacy, despite global difficulties, including high interest rates. He added the government would do its very best to lead the Korean economy to grow in 2024. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News.
And construction orders from the Middle East have been pouring into Korea this year. According to Seoul's Trade Ministry, findings of the first 11 months of the year show overseas orders amounting to well over $23 billion, 13% higher on year. And orders from the Middle East surged over threefold to account for $8.7 billion. The ministry is linking the surge to the flurry of summit-level diplomatic engagements between South Korea and its counterparts in the Middle East over the past year. Overseas orders are expected to hit their target of $30 billion by the end of this year. In the U.S., consumer prices accelerated at a slower pace in October, further fueling expectations for yet another rate freeze by the Federal Reserve. Our Shin Yeon reports.
New data on inflation, as measured by personal spending, showed price pressures are easing, likely giving the U.S. Federal Reserve more incentive to hold rates steady. According to a U.S. Commerce Department report released Thursday, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, excluding food and energy prices, rose 0.2% for October and 3.5% year-on-year. This is down from respective readings of 0.3% and 3.7% the previous month, and also in line with expert expectations by the Wall Street Journal. In addition, energy prices fell 2.6%. Goods prices saw a 0.3% decrease, while services rose 0.2%. On the services side, the prices of international travel, healthcare, food services, and accommodations saw the greatest gains. The PCE price index, a measure of prices that people living in the United States pay for goods and services, is often considered by the Fed in its policy making. Meanwhile, the New York Fed Bank President John Williams said on Thursday that tighter financial and credit conditions after the Fed raised its policy rate 5.25 percentage points in the last 20 months should help bring inflation down further. He explained that improvements in supply chains are also easing price pressures. Shin Yeon, Arirang News.
In other news, the 28th session of the Conference of the Parties within the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change opened doors on Thursday over in Dubai, and a remarkable feat on day one appears to be fueling quite a bit of optimism. Our Arirang reports.
Every year, the COP meets to determine ambition and responsibilities for climate change and to identify and assess measures to address climate change. This year's conference, COP28, is being hosted by the United Arab Emirates. And this year's COP President Sultan Al Jaber shook up the meeting by kicking off the conference with a deal on day one. Delegates agreed to proceed with actualizing a fund to help compensate vulnerable countries coping with loss and damage caused by climate change. Such deals are normally sealed at the last minute after days of negotiations.
The fact that we have been able to achieve such significant milestone in the first day of this COP is unprecedented. This is historic. The fact that we were able to get the agenda voted and agreed on without any delay For those who have been involved in previous COPs, this is just unprecedented.
As Al Jaber celebrated the momentum behind the agenda as historic, Executive Secretary of UN Climate Change Simon Steele also emphasized that the result did not happen overnight, and it was decades of discussions that led to an agreement at COP27 in Egypt in 2022, which ultimately came to fruition this year.
The discussions were challenging. This is 30 years worth of discussion, which concluded in Sharm el-Sheikh last year. With today's news on loss and damage gives this UN climate conference a running start.
Following the adoption of the agreement, a handful of countries made pledges for contributions to the startup phase of the fund. Of the 197 countries represented at COP28, the UAE and Germany have each pledged $100 million. Other EU member states have together pledged $125 million, followed by the United Kingdom's pledge of around $50 million, while the United States pledged $17.5 million and Japan $10 million. Several countries had objected to the World Bank engaging in managing the funds, but all parties ultimately agreed on the condition that the World Bank's oversight would be temporary, lasting for 4 years. Discussions and negotiations are expected to continue throughout the 2 weeks of the COP28 conference, which runs until December 12th. Ian-jin, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, Korea is putting in motion a plan to better address labor shortages in the dining industry and more. Moon Hye-ryun has details.
The government announced a pilot project to expand the eligible E9 visa employment sectors to tackle the labor shortage crisis in local industries. The E9 visa is a work visa for foreign nationals to carry out what's regarded as non-professional work and allows them to work in the manufacturing, construction, agriculture, fishery and service sectors. The government has increased the annual quota for E9 visa holders to 165,000 for 2024. And starting from April and July, they can work in dining, mining and forestry. However, in the dining industry, only Korean food restaurants can hire E9 visa holders and are subject to specific requirements. Restaurants with under 5 employees must have been operating for over 7 years, while those with more than 5 workers need at least 5 years in business. These measures come as the aging population, low birth rate and the COVID-19 pandemic have led to severe short staffing.
It's been quite a while now since we first started seeing labor shortages in this industry. You could even go so far as to say the job market has collapsed. This new government policy will be extremely helpful.
According to data released by Statistics Korea, the labor shortage in the dining industry has increased more than 5-fold over the past 3 years. Earlier this year, the government expanded the H2 visa job sectors to include the entire restaurant industry. Additionally, working hours for international students with D2 visas were extended, allowing them to take on part-time weekday jobs. But as the above visa holders aren't really looking for work in the food service industry, expanding the hiring pool to E9 visa holders is expected to help rejuvenate the job market. Some are concerned about what this could mean for domestic workers, but restrictions are in place to protect them. Restaurants with fewer than 5 employees are limited to hiring 1 E9 visa holder, and those with more than 5 up to 2. Others feel that this isn't enough and that more industries need to be included, such as the accommodation sector.
Business is back to normal for hotels, but it's been difficult to hire staff that we cut down on during the pandemic.
The government will review the situation next month to address the increasing demand for foreign labor in the accommodation industry. A dedicated task force has also been established, indicating that more changes are on the horizon. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. The 30th meeting of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe's Ministerial Council officially started on Thursday and will last for 2 days in North Macedonia's capital, Skopje. Top diplomats from more than 50 countries arrived there on Wednesday, while Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, and later Poland and Romania, officially boycotted the meeting in protest against the attendance of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The meeting of the 57-member OSCE began with a degree of tension on Thursday as Lavrov claimed that it was in deplorable shape and that its prospects are unclear, while reaffirming the Kremlin's opposition to the US and NATO allies' efforts to limit Russia's influence. Lavrov commented that the OSCE is essentially being turned into an appendage of NATO and the European Union. This was the first time Russia's top diplomat has visited a NATO member nation since his country invaded Ukraine in February 2022. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken made a brief stop on Wednesday but left for Israel hours later. Russia's Supreme Court on Thursday ruled to declare the international LGBTQ public movement as extremist and has banned its activities. The court hearing was held behind closed doors with no defendants, while some reporters were allowed to hear the court's decision. The lawsuit filed by the Justice Ministry earlier this month argued that it has identified signs and manifestations of an extremist nature by an LGBTQ+ movement operating in Russia, including incitement of social and religious discord. While there has been a decade-long crackdown on LGBTQ rights in Russia, this move is seen as the most drastic step taken so far. Many international human rights and LGBTQ+ rights activists are raising concerns over the safety of members of their community in Russia. Footballer Cristiano Ronaldo is facing a class action lawsuit in the US seeking at least $1 billion in damages over his promotion of cryptocurrency exchange company Binance. The claimants are suing for lost investments, alleging that Ronaldo's promotion of his personal brand of NFTs released by Binance was deceptive and unlawful. They say this led to a 500% increase in searches for the crypto exchange, linking to sales of unregistered securities such as Binance's BNB cryptocurrency. Claimants also argued that Ronaldo never disclosed how much he was getting paid in promotion for investment in securities. In November 2022, Binance announced the CR7 collection of NFTs, referring to his initials and shirt number. The NFTs, which were $77 upon release, have since fallen to about $1. The last pair of giant pandas living in the UK are set to return to China in early December. Yang Guang and Tian Tian have been on loan to the Edinburgh Zoo since 2011 under a 10-year contract, which was extended by the China Wildlife Conservation Association for an extra 2 years. The pandas were among the most popular animals at the Edinburgh Zoo, but Thursday was the final opportunity to see giant pandas at the Edinburgh Zoo or indeed anywhere else in the UK. The giant pandas will return home to China in early December. Kim Si-young, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. December starts with a mid-winter-like note in many places. A cold wave advisory remains in place for Gangwon-do and surrounding regions, and a dry weather advisory remains in place for East Coast areas. Fire safety is a must around this time. Meanwhile, snow continues in the West Coast regions of Jeollado provinces and Jeju, which will continue into late this afternoon. But a mix of rain and snow will last through tonight on Jeju Island. And a heavy snow advisory is in place for parts of Jeollado provinces and mountainous regions in Jeju. Drive and walk with caution. Stay safe today. Afternoon highs are similar to a couple of degrees higher than yesterday. Gwangju tops out at 5 degrees Celsius. Seoul and Chuncheon will be topping out at 2 and 3 degrees respectively this afternoon. Sunny skies in store except in Jeollado and Jeju today. The air should feel much more comfortable from tomorrow afternoon. Then we can expect much more bearable temperatures next week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour here in Korea. Coming up next is our panel session, so do stay with us. Thank you for now.